Ant-Man and the Wasp is the 20th MCU movie to come out. And this is once again directed by Peyton Reed and stars Paul Rudd once again, who has Scott Lang, who is on the final few days of his house arrest. After the events that took place in Civil War, he's been placed there, and he's almost done with this entire punishment. He's ready to get back out there and be Ant-Man again, but he still has to live under the rules of the Accords that were set up. However, when Hank Pym finds a way to try and find Janet Van Dyne in the quantum realm, which is where Scott was in the last movie, and he miraculously came back from it, he realizes that maybe Scott has the key to finding out what happened to her, and this time he also has a partner with Hope Van Dyne, aka now she's the Wasp. And since the movie is releasing here a week late, some of you have already seen the movie, so if you have, there are going to be spoilers after the grade is given, but if you're someone who is still waiting for the movie to come out or has not seen it yet, then you can avoid that and come back later to watch the spoiler discussion. Now, of course, I was excited for this movie. I mean, this is one of those things where I know it's weird to be excited for Ant-Man, but the first Ant-Man was actually a really enjoyable movie and one I really was a huge fan of. I think it's a really funny and a very original movie in terms of the way it handled its action sequences and certain visual things, and that carry forwards into this movie. However, this movie is also following on the heels of Infinity War, and I can understand why for some people this movie will be a palate cleanser. This is not an especially dark movie. In fact, to call it a dark movie would kind of be a stretch. This is actually a very safe movie in many ways, and in a way it's kind of a lighter toned movie than the first movie. It's kind of fun. It's just plain entertainment. But there's nothing really wrong with plain entertainment if done right. And for the most part, Ant-Man and the Wasp does perfectly fine in that department. Yes, is a break from the grim and dark stuff that we just saw in Infinity War. Yet at the same time, it has its faults, it has its issues. And one of those things is maybe it feels too much like a palate cleanser, if you know what I mean. Let's talk about the positives first. I think Paul Rudd was excellent casting as Ant-Man. He's once again really good here. So is Evangeline Lilly. She's very good, once again. And there's a lot to appreciate with the cast over here. Michael Douglas as Hank Pym is also great. There are sequences between him and Janet Van Dyne, played in this movie by Michelle Pfeiffer, where they're de-aged. And, I mean, it's amazing what they can do with de-aging technology nowadays. I mean, we've come a long way since 2010, since Tron Legacy did it. Ever since then, where we've come now with de-aging, especially with this movie, and to an extent even Blade Runner 2049 with Rachel, I mean, this is quite amazing. So one of the things I really appreciated in this movie, aside from the visual effects and those performances, are the action sequences, because Ant-Man has that unique thing where you can have the action sequences take place with the smaller scale stuff. And for some reason, even though it's small scaled, it looks great in IMAX. I know that sounds like an IMAX sponsorship, but I would recommend seeing this movie in IMAX. It looks absolutely beautiful. And it's a movie that realizes that the smallness of it makes it pretty grand in the whole scheme of things. Once again, the soundtrack's great. The first film also had a really good one. This one's also really good. They've improved on the action sequences in this movie quite a bit too. This one actually has a lot more ingenuity to some of the sequences that are put into it, and there are some very unique things going on in this movie that were quite fascinating. I also really liked Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp. I thought she stole the movie. She was probably the best part of it. I really liked her performance. I think she's a very charismatic actress. She was actually pretty much stealing the scene every time she got a chance to. Sometimes I feel like it became her movie though, on a deliberation note. For a large chunk of the movie, Paul Rudd is kind of put to the side. He's kind of playing dumb for the most part, which some people have taken issue to. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because at the end of the day, he does feel a little lost in a world where he doesn't quite understand what's going on right now. And so there's obviously going to be some more alignment to things, but he's constantly marveled at some of the stuff that the Wasp can do as compared to what he can do, especially with the first movie and with what's happened after that. As for flaws, I would say one of the problems is some of the narrative. Because it plays it a little safe, it doesn't feel very much like a lot is at stake. It's also not helped with the fact that this takes place before Infinity War. And if you've seen Infinity War, no spoilers as of yet in the spoiler section, you know how that movie ends. It's not the best outcome for the heroes. And so I can understand why some people watching Ant-Man and the Wasp won't feel like there's a lot at stake at times, and it doesn't feel very intense. There are points where it gets very exciting, but that's about the limit of it. The rest of the time, it feels very safe and very contained as its own movie. Also, Ghost. I didn't think that she was a very compelling villain at points. I thought she was well acted. I think Hannah John-Kamen, I believe her name is. She was very good in the movie. I just thought that she could have been a little more interesting at points, and there was an intriguing backstory to her, to say the least. And I would have liked to see a little more of that. There was a dark hint of her storyline in there, but they kind of don't go into it. Now, I'm going to go into more about this in the spoiler review, but Janet Van Dyne in the movie, Michelle Pfeiffer, there are certain things that just happen in the third act, which I want to talk about in detail, because that stuff's interesting. There's also the 2 post-credit scenes. I'll talk more about that. Ant-Man and the Wasp is a really fun movie if you want to check out, if you want a palate cleanser, and if you want to have something fun to watch during the weekend. It has its flaws, sure, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty enjoyable film nonetheless. I'm going to give Ant-Man and the Wasp an 8 out of 10. And now we come to the spoiler section of the review. So like I said, if you've not seen the movie, now I'm going to talk about it in detail. There are a few very interesting story details that happen towards the third act of the movie. But first, I'm going to start with where we are at the beginning of Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is that once Scott got out of the quantum realm, everybody was interested in how he managed to do it, especially Hank Pym in particular, because Janet Van Dyne, in order to stop the missile from hitting the city all those years ago, she went between the molecules, went subatomic, and she got stuck in the quantum realm. And so it's interesting because if Scott got out, that means she could probably still be alive in there. And so they start to work on the quantum tunnel, which could be the key to finally getting her out of the quantum realm. And so when Scott manages to somehow have a vision inside the quantum realm of Janet Van Dyne looking for her daughter, playing hide and seek, and Hope is hiding inside a wardrobe, he sees the fact that, that's weird, and he calls Hank Pym and tells him that, hey, I had this weird dream, and he's still under house arrest at this point in time. He's a couple of days away from being released. However, he is found immediately by Hope Van Dyne and taken into a van, and he's taken over to Hank Pym, where he explains the fact that he had this dream and he saw Janet, and that there is a neural bridge of sorts which has been established, and that there's some kind of a message that Janet has placed inside of Scott's mind that will enable them to find out where Janet is right now. That's actually a very interesting concept. And at the point of time that they figured this out, Ghost, Hannah John-Kamen's character, or her name is actually Ava in this movie, she has come out of the quantum realm many years ago, but it's not exactly the way it is, because Ghost actually is a little girl whose father was working with S.H.I.E.L.D. a long time ago, while Hank Pym was also working at S.H.I.E.L.D. And when Hank Pym found out that he was not a very good employee, that things were not going very well between them as partners, he fired Ava's father, and he started to work on his own quantum tunnel. When it went unstable and things were starting to go horribly wrong, Ava came to save her dad. Her mother came running in too, but her parents were killed. And in the process, there was a quantum diffusion that happened, and there was a molecular disturbance where she basically was untouchable. She was not someone who had any kind of matter anymore. She could phase through things, and there are echoes of her created around her as she walks and as she talks and as she makes turns here and there. So there was definitely a sense of interesting connections in that way, and how S.H.I.E.L.D. used her as a weapon of mass destruction and as an assassin, and how she's fading away and this is eating her alive, and so she needs Janet Van Dyne's powers or whatever she may have found in the quantum realm in order to unlock her power in terms of getting it removed and becoming a normal human being again. And so suddenly the entire film is essentially a search to find Janet Van Dyne. Meanwhile, you also have Birch, played by Walton Goggins, who has his own business going on with the Wasp because he's looking for profits to make out of selling quantum technology to Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne. And when he finds out that that's what's going on, he wants a piece of it for himself, and when refused, he becomes a major part of the movie in trying to get the tech from Hank Pym. When Scott gets involved as well, he wants to get the tech from Scott, and he's going after them through the ex-convicts like Luis and all, and that kind of becomes a subplot. This is one of the things I didn't really enjoy about the film because I wasn't a huge fan of Walton Goggins' character in this movie. He's a very good actor, he's a very talented actor, but I thought his character, I can't say it's wasted, I just didn't feel like it advanced the plot in extreme ways as compared to, say, Ghost did. But even then, the thing about this movie that felt the strangest to me is that there didn't seem to be a real villain in this movie. Sure, Ghost is the villain, but throughout the film, she's not trying to be the villain. She is someone who is trying to get her life back, and there wasn't any such big threat. The biggest threat, I guess, yeah, in a way, is still Ghost, but you kind of understand where she's coming from, while at the same time she feels a little underdeveloped. As the film goes on, you kind of start to see it, but her way of going around it and her motivation in order to do things gets more and more twisted at points as the film continues, and that makes the line a little blurred, and I wasn't being able to connect with her enough because of that. Also, once we finally get to Janet Van Dyne at the end of the movie and she comes out of the quantum realm, Michelle Pfeiffer, who is also de-aged at one point in time in the movie, and they did such an amazing job with the de-aging process in this movie. She comes out and she has a lot of powers within her, which kind of feel like they were a little convenient at points. She manages to stop Ghost's phasing by just like this telepathic power, and she hints at the fact that she's not the same woman anymore after being in the quantum realm for 30 years. So it kind of raises the question that, okay, if she's been there like that for the last 30 years and she's gotten all these powers, like, what has she gotten? Like, are we going to have a proper explanation into that? Because some of it just feels a little convenient and it just gets done, and part of the movie kind of wants you to just accept it the way it is, and I don't feel like that's a very good approach for a movie like this. Like, you want to take some time developing certain things and certain things that have changed for these characters, and the movie is longer than the first movie, in fact. So there were moments where there could have been a little more done. There are some very hilariously done things. For example, there's an FBI agent who is keeping track of Scott in the house and whether or not he's leaving the house or not. There was some interesting moments over there, and they constantly make a joke about how the FBI just keeps breaking doors down, as Judy Greer keeps remarking. That was also pretty entertaining. But overall, some of these things kind of felt like a narrative backstep from the first one, because the first one was a heist movie and was a very entertaining heist movie, and there were compelling reasons to doing the heist. In this one, I feel like the story feels a little thinner than the first movie, and it kind of feels like a placeholder movie. It kind of feels like we're waiting for Avengers 4 not to happen because of the post-credit scenes, which let's talk about. So the first one is, of course, the most important scene, and most people have already talked about it. And, well, just in case you've just seen the movie and want to talk about it, Scott is going back into the quantum realm to get the healing powers for Ghost. He gets it, and once he's about to come out, and Hope is giving the countdown on the walkie-talkie, suddenly it goes off. And Scott is just stuck there, and he's like, all right, guys, very funny, where are you guys? And it cuts back to the outside where you see these 3 mounds of just like ash, and you realize, because somebody did something in the last Marvel movie. So it's interesting to see how Thanos' actions are gonna go into the next movie, because now we have the quantum realm involved, and I'm interested to see how well, not Thanos, but Scott is going to use the quantum tunnel and what they've talked about in this movie as something against Thanos. Like, that's going to be an interesting thing to explore. Like I said, the Janet Van Dyne thing, some of it just felt a little rushed. Some of it felt a little convenient, I would say that. I like the use of Giant Man in this movie quite a bit. I like the way that they enhanced on Ant-Man's glitching powers in the new suit, and how he kept going from a smaller size to a bigger size to, in between. And that was actually quite funny. I really liked some of that comedy dynamic that was there in the movie. I liked Louise just telling the story about how he met Scott. It was hilarious. It was great to see him do that thing again where he starts talking in dialogues and dubbing over other people's words. I thought that was fantastically done. They do at one point hint at Goliath with Lawrence Fishburne's character, which I'm interested to see where they go with that. If they end up doing an Ant-Man 3, which they might, and maybe, just maybe, what if we get like a 4 thing where we get Hank Pym, Jenna Van Dyne, Hope Van Dyne, and Scott Lang, and they're all fighting? I mean, I doubt that'll happen, but like, kind of got hints of it at this point in time in the movie. I don't know. That's a completely different digression, but I think Goliath would be an interesting thing to discuss at any point if they ever decide to bring it up as a plot point in future Marvel movies, because he's a big part of the Ant-Man universe, and we'll see what happens about that. I could go a little more into the spoiler discussion if possible. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else that I've left out on, but really those were the main things I wanted to talk about because they explore the quantum realm in just such an interesting way, and I want to know more about how they explore it. I liked Hank going in though and finding Janet. That was really well done. Like I said, there are worlds in there which I would like to see explored more in future movies, and I think once we get to Avengers 4, there might be a lot more of that, and I'm excited to see what they do with that. But anyway, guys, that's enough for my Ant-Man spoiler talk. I want to know now from you guys what you guys thought of the movie. What are your thoughts on it? What are the things that you wanted me to talk about in detail that I didn't, and that you think are important to discuss? Thank you so much as always for watching. If you've stuck all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much. And thank you for the response to my Sacred Games video. I know some people don't really appreciate the stance I took, some people do. Either way, whichever camp you're in, thank you so much for watching it nonetheless. And there's an interesting debate over it. And even if you're somebody who commented saying, you know, bad stuff, whatever. It's, as always, guys, thank you so much. And if you like this, please just subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.